Hey y'all, today I'm gonna make a bad sine wave. Why, you might ask? Well, the short answer is revenge. Actually, okay, there was a local auction where there were a few old test oscillators up for auction. Now, probably many of you know there's already a very pleasant German gentleman who talks a lot about using test equipment in music, so I'm not trying to be him, but I just thought it would be neat to have some of these old oscillators, and maybe I could use them in my teaching. But of course, as happens with auctions, my $5 bid for a possibly not working oscillator was quickly overshadowed, and I quickly gave up. So why would anyone want these old oscillators? Well, many people would make a claim about their analog warmth. And there's a lot to dig into about these stereotypes of analog being warm and digital being sterile, but let's set that aside and perhaps agree that a little bit of imperfection can be beautiful. There are all sorts of examples of this. One that immediately comes to mind is this Japanese idea of wab-sabi, which is an aesthetic that forefronts impermanence and imperfection. Anyway, to cut to the chase, I'm going to make an oscillator today to replace the one that I was outbid on. Now, as always, my goal is not to analyze what the exact imperfections of this test oscillator would have been, but instead to make something that is imperfect in a pleasing way. Or at least in a way that's pleasing to me. Let's start just by making a slider-controlled sine oscillator. Command J gives me one of these horizontal sliders. Command 3 for a number, just so we can see what's coming out of that slider. It's going to be 0 to 127, because these are set up to be automatically MIDI sliders. For that reason, let's go Command 1, M to F, change that MIDI note number to a frequency. Command 3 so we can see that. You know what, let's throw in Command 2, a message. $1, 300. This is a message that I'm going to pass into a Command 1 line object. And so all this line is doing is it's so that frequency doesn't jump. It's so it'll be smoothed, right? And so it'll be smoothed every 300 milliseconds, which is pretty fast, but enough to take some of the edge off here. Command 1, OSC tilde for our oscillator. Command 1 times tilde 0.5 for a little attenuation. Command 1, DAC, digital analog converter, tilde. Boop. Okay, so we heard a big pop there, and that's just because our frequency of this is currently set to 0. Makes sense? This is a really sloppy way for me to turn the volume down, but I've just turned it down to be sub-audio, and that's how I'm doing that. But, it'll work for today. Okay, slider to control the pitch. Command 5, pitch. And then this then becomes our frequency. Smooths it out. And then sine oscillator. That's not how you spell oscillator. Attenuator. I could be incredibly lazy in making my bad sine wave and just go and do this. Edit, Command D. I could say, oh, well, it's a bad oscillator, a bad sine wave oscillator. So all I got to do, let's add a little bit of noise, and let's make that noise, significantly lower amplitude. Plug this in. There's our noise. You can't hear that yet. There we go. Okay, here we go. Whoops, I didn't run that into both speakers. There we go. Outputs, I should say. There we go. Full disclosure, I think I'm only recording the left channel, so if that sounded a bit weird, if you didn't hear that noise, that's why. Okay. That's kind of a not so great bad oscillator, but the idea is that, okay, it's an old piece of equipment and it's introducing noise. But so here's my idea. Instead of just adding that noise and mixing that noise into our signal, what if we frequency modulated by that noise? All right? It's pretty easy to do, but the effect is going to be pretty different. So when we do FM, and I've showed this, I don't think I've talked about this, but I think I've showed this in one of my patch from scratch videos. What we're going to do is we're going to add tilde. So this is our frequency, right? As set by the slider. This still works. But what I want to add to that is another signal in the audible range. Now, when I've done FM synthesis before, this has been a sine wave. Again, we can create tons and tons of frequencies with just 2 sine waves. But now I'm going to use the noise. Now let's, if I just run this in, this isn't going to be very interesting. I don't hear much of a difference. And the reason for that is this is, again, let's think about our signal. It's going from -1 to 1. We want to have a significant impact on this frequency, not just 1 to 1. So, for example, I could take this, Command 1, multiply tilde. I could multiply it by the frequency. Now, since I want this to be a subtle effect, well, I guess let's just listen to that. But I'm telling you, I'm probably going to dial that back in just a second. Let's check this out. Command E. Now that's a different effect than just mixing in that noise. One of the things that's different about it is that we're not creating noise across the whole spectrum now. Our noise is being used to create sidebands. I'll throw up a couple sonograms of this. Here's a sine wave. Here's the sine wave mixed with the noise. Here's a sine wave frequency modulated by the noise. And so you can see that the things that aren't the sine wave are closer to that frequency. Now, as I said, I tested this out a little bit in practice, and I found that if we take that frequency and have it, it's a little bit more subtle and a little bit nicer. Let's check it out. Okay, so far so good. Now, there's a lot of high frequencies in there, and I can actually limit how much high frequency is in that deviation by running my noise through a low pass filter. Let's just do 100 hertz. So if I just do this LOP, L-O-P tilde, this is a 1-pole filter. So this is not a very steep curve at all. Okay, let's check it out. You hear that? That's a bit more of a subtle effect there. If I disconnect it, we can hear our sine wave again. I think this sounds pretty great. Okay. Now, we could end it there. That's a fine, terrible sine wave. But one thing that we could try here is we could take what's coming out of the oscillator with its slight deviation, and then we can send tilde feedback. And so we're going to send our kind of funky oscillator with its little bit of dancing around that frequency, and we're going to send that, and let's add it up to this noise. Let me turn down for a second. So adding 2 signals together, I'm going to want a plus tilde there. So we're going to take this noise. Again, I apologize for my overlapping lines here. And I'm going to add that noise to the receive tilde feedback. And then I'm not going to do a low pass filter, but what I am going to do is I'm going to invert it. So times tilde -1. Add it together. Are you ready? Boy, that's a pretty bad sine wave. you might be fearing that I've gone too far here, and you might not be wrong. So one last step we can take, back to our nice sine wave. Let's get it out of the way for a second. One last step we can take is we can add Command J. This is another slider. And let's go into the properties of this slider. Let's set it away from its default of 127 and set it to be 100. So it's just 0 to 100. And then if I take that 0 to 100 and I multiply it by 0.01, now I'm going to have numbers that go from 0 up to, 1.27. I clearly did not do that right. Properties upper 100. Okay. 0 to 1, right? And so now I have all these decimal places that I can do. Now let me go up from 0 to 1 here. Okay? And what I can do is I can take this, Command E, multiply, tilde. So I'm taking the noise and the feedback, everything that makes into a bad sine wave, and then I'm multiplying it by a number going into here. Sorry, this is the problem with crossed wires, as you start to lose your track of things. I could send out that frequency. Let me just do that to help clear this up. Command 1, send frequency. No tilde on that send because it's just sending, it's not sending an audio signal, it's just sending the number of that frequency. Command D, receive, receives the frequency, multiplies it by 0.5. Still looking pretty bad here. There we go. Don't mind me if I fast motion this part of the video in the edit. So now we have a control for the badness. Let's turn all the way down. Hey, there's our nice, beautiful sine wave back. But what's a sine wave without a little bit of badness? Or a little bit more badness? Or a whole lot of badness? Does seem to detune it a little bit. That's probably because we've got that feedback going on. Just before we wrap up here, for those of you who are interested, I built the same idea in Reaktor and seems equally effective. Reaktor, of course, makes our keyboard control a little bit more straightforward. And the other thing that was quick to test in Reaktor is I tried this with a triangle wave, a pulse wave, and a sawtooth wave too. Anyway, there are tons of ways to make wonderful, imperfect, subtly distorted waveforms, and I encourage you to experiment and search for your own unique signature sounds. That's all I got for today. See you next time.